Now that you've had your first taste of dividing the code into different classes to follow an architecture, let's go ahead and touch on a few reasons why this is better than putting everything into your fragment. As discussed, the separation of concerns design principle helps us in two ways. First, the code is more organized, manageable, and debuggable. Second, by moving code to the view model, you protect yourself from having to worry about lifecycle problems and bugs. Another aspect of this design is that the code is very modular. Notice how this arrow has a direction, which means that the UI controller knows about the view model, but the view model doesn't know about the UI controller. As we build off of this architecture, we're going to map out unidirectional relationships like this between more and more classes. One of the goals of this architecture is to keep the number of references between classes small. This modularity allows us to swap out a single class for different implementation without needing to update a bunch of other classes in your app. For example, you could redesign the UI, and you wouldn't necessarily need to make changes to the view model. Another aspect and benefit of this architecture is that the view model contains no references to activities, fragments, or views. This happens to be helpful for testing. You might have noticed that in your project, there are two directories with test in the name. You've got Android test and test. Testing on Android differentiates between tests that can be run without emulating the Android framework, which are in the test folder, and tests that are more heavyweight that require emulating the Android framework. These tests can be found in the Android test folder. By designing your app so that these Android classes aren't referenced in the view model, you can run pure lightweight unit tests that don't depend on the Android framework code and therefore run faster and are easier to write. So to summarize, splitting the code into a defined architecture helps you because it separates out concerns, which makes your code more organized and easier to debug. Another benefit is that you can move code out of the UI controller into classes like ViewModel, where you don't need to worry as much about the Android lifecycle. Also, the code is more modular, which makes it easier to swap out and update sections of code. And finally, the code is easier to test.